it's great to have Martin, Mark and Alice with us. And also, I know part of the bigger team is artist Scott Farlow. And maybe I could start off by just asking you to introduce a little bit about the project, just kind of where it takes place, and maybe something of the research aims. And I don't know who wants to kick off with that, but any of you be willing to take that question would be brilliant.
Thanks, Tim. So our project is really kind of exploring the significance of Robinswood Hill Park, which is a kind of geographical landmark that's on the suburbs of Gloucester. And it's an interesting landmark because it's a kind of meeting point between the urban and rural. So it connects the surrounding, so it connects the neighbourhoods on the outskirts of Gloucester City, where the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust works, which I think Mark will say more about in a moment. So it connects the neighbourhoods of Matson, White City, Podsmead and Tuffley. And then if you stand at the summit of the hill, you can see the kind of surrounding landscape, which includes the Severn Bridge to the south, the Malvern Hills, the Black Mountains to the west, and then the Cotswolds as well. So it's a kind of important meeting point. And the focus of our research project really is to draw on arts-based inquiry methods to explore the kind of significance and importance of the hill to local residents. So we're particularly interested in kind of intergenerational memories and experiences of the hill. And I suppose our kind of key lines of inquiry, if you like, are how does the park resonate in the day-to-day lives of the residents? What's its value and significance, and how can it contribute, most importantly, to community well-being in the present and also going forward in the future? And the way that we're looking at this is we're running a series of workshops with some of the community partners from the Trust and also local school children, which will involve kind of a combination of having walks on the hill and then doing kind of critical inquiry through different visual arts mediums. And this is where Scott Farlow, our artist on the research team, comes in to explore those kind of intergenerational memories and kind of participants' embodied experiences of the hill and so forth. And then the idea is that will culminate in a community meal, a ceremony at the top of the hill. And then we're also hoping for some art exhibitions as well. But Mark, do you want to say a little bit more about some of the participants and the community partners that we're working with in the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust?
So Gloucestershire Gateway Trust is a community development charity. We've been established for about 13 years. But the work that we're doing in these areas is really a successor piece of work to a whole range of resident-led neighbourhood organising over the last 30 years. Robinswood Hill, as Alice has mentioned, is a critical place from our perspective. It's really surrounded by social housing estates, and the largest concentration of social housing estates wrapped around as kind of horseshoes around the hill. And then on the other side of the hill is the M5 motorway. So I'm actually speaking to you from Gloucester Services on the M5, which is a community business that we're involved in and helped to set up as part of residents' aspirations for regeneration in the area. Robinswood Hill itself has a long, long history. It's a site of geological international significance, but it also has a long history. It's where the siege of Gloucester, where the king laid siege to the city of Gloucester, and subsequently, as I say, it's had all these peripheral housing estates built around it. So it has a lot of centuries of history and story about it. And for many generations since the estates were built around the hill, starting with White City in the 1920s and then Matson in the 1950s, it was residents' back garden, really. And it's where they went to play, it's where they went to explore, to have fun. It was really a very special place. Now, the connection between residents and the communities has been lost over time, particularly sort of during the 70s. Partly to do with social housing allocation policy and the availability of housing and what happened with allocations only going to people at the various highest level on the waiting list. So it meant that often people came into the area with no historic connection. And so the stories and the appreciation of the natural asset that Robinswood Hill was lost really over a period of 10 or 15 years. So for us, it's been one of our aims over the last decade really to try and help people reconnect to that hill and appreciate the history and the story and the benefits that it can generate. And we've been working with a range of partners like the Wildlife Trust and community play organisations and neighbourhood organisations to try and help people make that connection. So this piece of research is really fantastically well timed and a really great opportunity for us to take stock so that we can learn the lessons of the period so far, help people share their stories across generations, because those people who are kind of my age and a little bit older, remember what Robinswood Hill was like. You can talk to people 60, 70, 80 who remember walking out of the city to go up the hill, to have their picnics there, to do their courting there, to play on the hill, all sorts of things. But that's been lost for those people who currently have families. And so we're going to be working with Robinswood School and Moat School, both of which are in the same multi-academy trust, but both of which are in special measures at the moment, so they're both in quite tricky places. But they are extremely enthusiastic to work with the project because they see the benefits of all the conversation, the stimulation, the art, the stories to be told. And we're also working with an adventure playground, the Venture in White City, who are a great community development organisation themselves and do fantastic work with families and children. So it's a real opportunity for us to take quite an innovative approach to learn and share the history of the hill and to try and help people show for themselves, how much they know about it, how much they've got to share, and to gather that to share for future generations as well. It's reconnecting people with a really fantastic natural asset.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark, for that. Could you tell us a bit about how the connection came with the university, how the connection came with Martin?
Gosh, well, it has a long history. So I guess the root of it for us is that we used to work with a woman called Sue Porter, who actually in the 90s helped manage a neighbourhood health programme for our predecessor organisation, a network of neighbourhood organisations. And Sue helped us sort of build a living history of our community action. And as part of that process, she connected us to a colleague in Louisville University, Mary Bryden Miller, who's been helping us do annual community surveys and training our local residents to be surveyors, to help us take our lead from the residents. And as part of that process, we've sort of come alongside Alice and the team there, and Alice has sort of taken over perhaps much of the role that Sue used to have with us in helping us gather our history, our story. We're really community action organisation, community organising, community building, social enterprise. We don't often take a lot of time to reflect on it. So getting alongside Alice and Sue previously has been really important for us to try and to capture that story so the lessons are not learned and that we pass that on to future generations as well. So Alice helps lead our training, our future creating workshops, our community survey teams, and we're looking all the time now really to gather our story and our evidence. And so that partnership with the university has become very special for us.
I didn't realise you were such a veteran of working with academics. I mean, Sue was absolutely an amazing person, and I know the work of Mary Bryden Miller. Alice, could you tell us a little bit about your own experience of working with the community organisation? I don't know what you feel like you've kind of learned in that process as well, of working alongside Mark and the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically on the Brigstow projects.
And the wider work that you've done with them as well, because you've obviously got a whole series of connections with the Gateway Trust.
Sure. So I think for me, a lot around learning around how you do collaborative forms of research and the importance of kind of co-developing lines of inquiry from early on. So I think if we just take this project, for example, I really like the way this project came about. It very much came about with Mark identifying an interest around, as he just explained, kind of wanting to learn more about the significance of Robinswood Hill, and thinking about how that learning can be taken forward to shape the work of the trust. And then right from the beginning, kind of, Scott and I went and we met Mark, and we met some of the other community partners as well. So Mark already mentioned the venture and also the Gloucestershire Gateway Trust. And climbed the hill and had found out lots of interesting kind of history about the hill. And through that walking process, actually, we ended up kind of coming up with the design of the workshops. And it was really nice to do the design of the research in that way, through kind of being in that place, being engaged through those kind of embodied experiences on the hill. And I think that's been really an important part of the kind of coming together of this project, if you like.
Yeah. Obviously, this is a project where embodied experiences of place are absolutely vital, and it feels like that's not totally what we're experiencing at the moment. So we're entirely separated, and we're kind of talking in the virtual. Can you tell us a bit about COVID? And that, I guess in some ways it feels like your project is one that maybe has some particular challenges because of the place-based embodied nature of what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about how your thinking has developed, or how you've tried to kind of reframe the project a little bit, or kind of delay the project.
Yeah, sure. So, Mark, I know you've got lots to say, and Martin probably as well, but we've kind of gone around in some circles, if you like. So we originally decided when the pandemic started that we would delay until September. But we realise now that it's still not really going to be possible to do that kind of engaged research. The workshops are inside and so forth. So we've thought about the potential of shifting to do something virtual and delivering something online. But when we looked into what that would look like, I think collectively we felt that it would really kind of move away from the focus of the project, which, as you said, is very much kind of place-based and experiencing senses of belonging and meaning around place. So we've now decided to delay the project. So we're hoping to start it in spring is the plan. Yeah, but I think we're really hoping that people's experiences of the pandemic and lockdown will be potentially kind of shape their understanding of Robinswood Hill, and we're hoping that they'll have stories around kind of its role potentially during this time.
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a couple of reflections on that. Really, so many of the metaphors that both Mark and Alice have used in order to describe the project are kind of three-dimensional physical ones with bodies in spaces, aren't they? Like walking together and eating together, sharing things. And the idea of, community and all the rest of it is very much, I think, a set of sort of spatial metaphors which relies on a certain kind of proximity, doesn't it? But then when we think about what university knowledge is very often like, it's almost more like the screen that we're on, isn't it? It's usually quite sort of flat and cognitive, and tends to value a certain set of terms which are traded between experts, often in quite an obscure sort of way, but more about the brain than the body, in a sense. So I think there's a real tension between both the way in which the sort of the valued knowledge in universities can meet the valued knowledge in the world, but also in terms of thinking about what it means to do this kind of stuff online. And even though, I've seen some really sophisticated and smart ways in which online technologies can be used, I still find it very, very difficult to imagine that you can get the kind of the richness, the thickness, the texture of what it means to be with other people by using the screen of a laptop. So, in some sense, I think it was almost inevitable, given COVID, that we would have to delay this stuff, because seeing what the view from Robinswood Hill is like from a screen is completely different to being there, to actually feeling it.
And I think everything we do is very simple and about relationships. And it's much more difficult to build those relationships with new people on a screen than it is in face-to-face, particularly when we're working with young people as well.
Yeah. And I think often the screen stuff can come once those relationships are formed. But you're right. I think it's not the kind of beginning of that, is it? That the beginning is a much more kind of embodied encounter. I was really interested in, Martin. I don't know if any of you got kind of any closing reflections on that. That idea of that sense of, one thing we talk a lot about in Brigstow is that knowledge lies everywhere. But as you suggested, Martin, that sometimes knowledge is, I guess, framed a little bit differently. And I kind of like your sense of the kind of a certain type of knowledge that's maybe head embodied or kind of abstracted, more concrete. What's your own kind of experience, I guess, of this project bringing all of those different knowledges together? That in a sense, no one has a monopoly on knowledge, and that actually probably the richest knowledge maybe lies with you, Mark. I mean, you know this place much better than Martin or Alice, and Scott. It's a place that is kind of very familiar. It's a place that you've walked up many different times. And I wonder if you had any kind of closing reflections on how you manage those competing knowledges or how you bring those knowledges together. Martin.
I guess just one very quick thing. It's about the idea of the Civic University. At Bristol, we talk quite a lot now about the notion that we're civic, that somehow we are concerned with and engaged with the city and the city region. I think that partly also involves us thinking about the sort of knowledges that we possess and that other people possess. And there's a sense in which if we want to be properly civic, then we need to, in a sense, recognize that our knowledges are no more privileged and important than a whole bunch of other people's knowledges. Yeah, and that's a very difficult thing for universities to do because they trade on this idea that they are containers for a special kind of knowledge. Yeah,
yeah, a kind of certain expertise. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that I think we start from the place that we believe the community are the experts in the issues that they have to deal with. And so, we have that bottom-up approach. And what we're trying to do really, I think, is unlock history and culture and stories that perhaps have got locked away because of disconnections over the last few decades. And so, I think those relationships and doing it face-to-face will be fundamental to making this the success that we know it can be.
Great. Alice, any closing reflections on that kind of question of knowledges?
I was thinking along a similar line, really, to what Mark said. I mean, I think there's, from a kind of academic point of view, there's a body of research that tries to kind of quantify the positive impacts and the value of people that live in close proximity to green space or their experiences in green space. And I think what I really like about this is that, that perspective of starting from the point of view that the local people are the experts and they hold the expert knowledge. And it's that knowledge that should inform interventions, community interventions into how, to kind of support engagement with that green space.
Great. Thanks so much to all of you. I guess what would be lovely is to kind of, if you wouldn't mind, we'd love to bring you all back together again to hear more as the project goes forward. And we could maybe do it on the hill, couldn't we, rather than in a classroom in the University of Bristol. But we'll try and touch base again with the team as you get into the spring next year and are able to kind of hopefully do some more face-to-face work with the schools that are partners in this project. What we'll do is we'll switch at this moment, I think, to the other team, and then we'll bring you back in because it'd be great to have some conversation at the end, because I think in some ways the next team has some similar kind of interests. I mean, their work is very much, again, place-based and is in largely rural contexts and is thinking about the relationship between people and places. And so I think what will be great is to bring them back in and we'll talk with them, and then maybe we'll kind of bring everyone back together to bring some more general questions. So we'll come back to you in a moment. And at this point, what I'd like to do is move on to the next team, the Tackling Uncertainty team, and welcome everyone. What would be great is just, I don't know who wants to kick off, but maybe one of you could just tell us a little bit about the project, just the kind of focus for it, and I guess the kind of research goals that you set out with.
With this project, we're asking how the long view of communities back to the medieval period might change the way we think about the future of our underused historic churches in relation to contemporary problems today. where we're coming from with this is that there is perhaps a risk that we've inherited to narrow a view of our churches as either being of such historic importance that we can't touch them. They have to be preserved at all costs, or that they serve a rather isolated and isolating Christian function today, which doesn't necessarily reflect the breadth of how these churches have functioned within their communities in the past. And many of these medieval churches have roots going back 800, 900 years. So really what we're asking is, by engaging with that long history, can we reconfigure the idea of new uses, not as a sort of radical departure from what churches are about, but actually as a reconnection with a much longer purpose and history that is complex and itself messy and all about dealing with uncertainty. These church buildings have in a way seen, they have seen everything, including previous global pandemics fairly regularly, and that's that's an issue which we're perhaps starting to unpick a little. So we've before COVID-19 we did a lot of interviews at Brockley in North Somerset, and they were very useful. They were very informative, but in a way that sort of semi-structured formal interview approach isn't well suited to unpick some of these issues around people's conceptions and people's misconceptions and people's deeper stories around changing life today. And rural communities have seen in the last 70 years an almost unimaginable change. And there is an imbalance there, which again comes to that relationship between academia, academic research, and people who know more than anyone else about the communities they live in. So the question was, can we do this in a different way, right? Can we make it more collaborative, more interactive? Can we change the time scale of it? And Xander, I don't know where Xander is.
He's just above you. Oh my
Xander has developed a device called the Jigsaudio device, which he will talk about. But I'll just sort of briefly introduce it here. Basically, it's a way of putting an interactive audio device into a physical site, which is really important for us, where people can record their stories, share their stories, contest stories over, could be, days, weeks, months, and slowly build essentially a physical archive of those stories. And we can run that in a way where people can make a contribution when they're ready, when they want, or we can combine it with workshops to explore those ideas together. So the project is about taking that device, finding a way of installing it, and having those conversations. And the team brings together medievalists and designers and heritage partners and community partners. The formidable Karen Shaw, who isn't with us today, but she's our link with Brockley, and she's instrumental in helping us try to do this together and tread carefully as we need to with this sort of project as well. So that's the shape of it.
That's great. Xander, could you tell us a bit about this device? Kind of, in a sense, they're probably going to want it on the hill as well, aren't they? To have a kind of in situ, place-based storytelling device.
Yeah, so I've just finished my PhD, and as part of that, I was trying to explore. I'm a town planner by background, and so as part of my PhD, I was trying to develop technologies that led to a more constructive discussion about place, really. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the use of technology in town planning is to make participation in planning faster, that you can do it anywhere, ideally through the internet at any time. And so what tends to happen is that you get a lot of technologies that kind of that facilitate a very quick reaction to questions, really. So you might be walking around and you get a notification on your phone, for example, that asks you what you want, and you kind of just stand there, look at something and say, that's what I want. And so Jigsaudio was developed almost to try and explore how developing a technology that embedded slowness and kind of reflective thinking in it could lead to a more conversational, expressive way of talking about places. And so we kind of, I'll just skip over it really quickly. So we wanted to create a technology that would allow people to use technology without necessarily having to use the internet or apps. So we're trying not to create new barriers to kind of using technology that might exclude a lot of people, really. We wanted to create a technology that was easily understood by the people, so that you could kind of walk up to it and use it rather than needing to download an app. And kind of key to it was trying to move from problem reporting to visioning. So rather than saying that's a problem, we say, what should we do next? And let's have a conversation about it, as well as allowing people to be more expressive in how they communicate. So Jigsaudio allows people to express themselves through drawing and talking rather than through prose, I suppose. And this is a device here. Here's one I made earlier.
Excellent.
So to engage with the device, participants are asked to draw their responses to open questions through drawing and talking. And so to use it, I've just got a blank sheet of paper here. So to use it, you answer an open question, you draw your response, and then you scan it on the device. And then using the device, you can attach an audio recording to your piece. And actually, I should have had the website earlier over it. And then the two were brought together on a website and can be physically engaged with to kind of explore those responses, really, and to offer so if you wanted to offer a counter narrative to it. So what you end up with is a website with loads of different views that you can click on these individual tiles and listen to them if you choose to, or you can be physically at a location and kind of engage with them there. So we did one at a modern art gallery in Gateshead called the Baltic. So this is what it looked like in situ. So there were loads of tiles. People could pick up one of these tiles, place it on the device and listen to what other people had said, but then also record a response to other people's views. And so what you ended up with was someone giving a vision for the future and then someone kind of offering a counter narrative. I think that's all I need to say. Is there anything that I've missed out, Tim, that I should have covered?
Well, no, I mean, and this will relate to COVID inevitably, but the idea that actually being there in person, yeah, and doing this physically is really important. And our perspective with this is, if the biggest part of the challenge around sort of re-envisioning, the futures of our church buildings is a conceptual one, then actually having people telling stories about their experiences, their expectations, their fears, their ambitions in place actually changes their relationship with the building.
Yeah.
So simply by engaging with this device, by doing this in the church, we can already start to change that conversation. And what we've tried to do, or what we will do, eventually, is actually relate different places within the church to different themes. So there'll be a device linked with the font, where we will explore that unbroken 900-year line of baptisms, within the community, and actually what does this mean for continuing that line across generations today. We use a family box pew to think about sort of community in a more horizontal sense, about the relationships between different families within the village and different sort of socio-economic issues as well. Village life is complex, and it's amazing how villages, even the smallest villages, have ways of keeping people together and keeping people apart. It's entirely normal, but it's something which we'd like to talk about. And a third one which we hope can be carried about by people themselves, so they can go to where they want to be within the church to reflect more on their own personal experiences. So that relationship between the device, place, space, and narrative is critical.
Could you tell us a bit more about the kind of COVID context? Because obviously COVID, in many ways, has been a challenge for your team as well because of this place-based approach. And obviously churches were places that were closed for a period of time, I guess are now open again for private prayer and for limited red services. I don't know what's the kind of story there in terms of your own thinking about this in Brockley.
It's been very interesting because it's in a way, it sort of revealed how much we take for granted in doing these sorts of interdisciplinary projects. Our ability to move between conceptual spaces and physical spaces is quite unhindered today, here, now, and that's great. But seeing how COVID has it's not created one reason why we couldn't do this work. It's created hundreds of reasons why it would now be impossible to do this work. From the suspension of our ethics, about getting people together, about churches closing because the Anglican Church took a particular policy in relation to the guidance, which then affected CCT, the Church of Conservation Trust, in terms of volunteers who open the churches every day, self-isolating or going under quarantine, or different project members having to move to different parts of the country just to be able to get through these difficult months. There's endless number of reasons why this suddenly became difficult. We couldn't produce the devices because the maker spaces were closed at the university, etc., etc., etc. And because that developing the device with people and actually then using it together over 5-6 months, it can't be replaced in a way. So we'll try to get things running by October, through to spring. We might start later in spring. We have to see. But it's sort of brought home just how important being able to physically get together is. And moving it online, I think, would also alienate a lot of the people we want to work with who just don't use technology in the way we do. They're either too young or they're of a generation where that's just not how they communicate.
From the medieval perspective, it's been really difficult to sort of engage with that behind the scenes research because archives are closed. We can't parish records. People are furloughed in archives. So we've come up against all sorts of barriers in terms of actually just accessing that primary source material that we can then build off and come up with these questions with the community off the back of. But I think that it's created new interesting research areas and questions for us. So for example, one of the questions we've been looking at now is, were these churches open during previous pandemics, so the Black Death as a sort of obvious example? And we've been finding out that actually no, they stayed open because they're considered very much a central community space. And they're actually sometimes used even more because they're used for things like penitential marches to try and get rid of pandemics. So I think it's really refocused what we're doing on kind of reminding us that the medieval perspective cannot be assumed, and that it's so essential for us to rethink the way that we're using the churches.
I mean, one thing that really interests me about the project is, as you talked about, Tim, and then you talked about, Lauren, is that kind of very long view of community. So that kind of mining back 800 or 900 years, because of the fact that there's this kind of physical trace, I guess, from the early medieval, in the heart of so many villages around where we live in Bristol. You just head south and north of us, east and west, and you find medieval churches. What can you tell us a little bit more about that sense of the kind of, I don't know, the disconnects, but also the connections between past and present, as you kind of think about that sort of long view and that sort of, I guess, almost like deep history storytelling? There's much more than just a human lifespan, it's sort of embedded in a community.
Lauren, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the interesting thing about taking physical things in the church is that we've got this sort of vertical idea of community through that font, which is the very sort of physical thing that we can sort of connect generations to. But then also we can take other newer items in the church and sort of use those to think about horizontal ideas of community with the box pew. I mean, I think it's good that we get kind of both aspects of that. I mean,
the font is amazing. I mean, we think it has a Saxon component, a Norman component, an early medieval component, a Georgian top, and soon it'll have a 21st century interactive audio device in it as well. It is an amazing example of how that continuity exists. But it is a continuity which is fragile, and that's the kind of thing we want to explore. One particularly special aspect of this from St. Nicholas, I mean, this hadn't occurred to me, but St. Nicholas is the patron saint of commerce, hence St. Nick's Market in Bristol. And there's a window there of St. Nicholas, but also a barefooted Franciscan monk, so a mendicant order that's sworn to poverty. And we're trying to work out why these two are together and Marianne Ailes, who's our Bristol professor on the project, and Lauren and Harry and Sarah have been exploring what that means in terms of a medieval concept of fair trade, of good trade that's economically viable but also meaningful within a community. And we know that from well before 1300, the rural areas around Bristol were bringing produce to the city. There was constant trade there. And if you look at how that's changed, right? So Brockley's gone from having one industry, farming, after the war, to now having something like 20 different businesses in it. And we know that rural areas per head have more registered businesses than urban areas, right? 18% of the population, but 25% of businesses. So this little village actually has an amazing array of companies there. A company that makes imitation 19th century French bedsteads. We have a talent development agency. We have a film producers. We have accountants, hairdressers. We have artists, and we think that any future of these churches. There's 16,000 parishes across the UK. And this conversation is big within the Anglican Church. This isn't just isolated sites. Mm-hmm. There has to be a stronger connection there between, residents of villages, many of whom run those businesses, and our understanding of what the link is between commercial life and community life. And again, looking back to the medieval period, our sense of the division between those two is far less distinct. It's much more complex. It's much more integrated. And we've had conversations in other villages with businesses who've been there 20, 30 years, and they say, this village has nothing to do with us. I only worked here for 30 years. I come in and I leave. It's not my community. So those divisions which have emerged very much in the last 30, 40 years are a problem. And we're trying to find new ways of tackling those conceptual barriers, those conceptual divides. And St. Nick's happens to be like the perfect, route in for that.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that although it is a physical space and we are looking at these physical objects, quite a good line of inquiry for us from the medieval side has been looking at things like ritual and memory as well. So trying to really use the physical objects to tap into things that are not physical. So, for example, rituals around baptism and the giving of gifts, and also gossip around baptism we found in court records as mnemonic devices for people to remember important births and important events up to sort of 20, 25 years later. So even though we're focusing on this physical space, I think a lot of the research is based in stories and narratives from the past as opposed to that sort of physical side.
And finding ways of understanding what those equivalent narratives and stories are today, or whether they can be newly created as a way of we use community very lightly. And this project has revealed that concepts of community are far more complex than you can imagine. There's no such thing as one community, and the way that has changed again in the last 30, 40 years as places like Brockley have become commuter towns, as people buy second homes, as people move in from other parts of the country. There's so much there to unpick, and the church, in a way, as Lauren has pointed out, the font has always been the great equalizer, because if you're born there, you're baptized there, independent of your status, independent of your wealth, independent of everything. Mm-hmm. And trying to see how we can use that church, whether you're a Christian or not, to rethink to make sense of what togetherness feels like at a time of great fracture, and perhaps greater fracture than we've ever had. Social media in some way keeps us more connected, but it also divides us more strongly. So yeah, there's a lot to do in this project. It's very exciting.
Could I just jump in with a question at this point from Bernie that's come up on the Q&A, and then I'd like to ask Tom and Xander a question a bit more about slow tech, which I think is really interesting about this project. Just from Bernie, because it links in, I think, a little bit maybe to what Tim and Lauren, you've been kind of talking about, especially some of the things you said, Tim. Bernie asks, we live in a very different context of religious identity in the 21st century. I'm wondering how this has shaped your research. Churches were very porous and organic with the life of the community in medieval life because religious identity was less contested. Yeah. How does this affect the role of churches that you're exploring?
Yeah, that's exactly our point, right? If there's a sense today that you can only go into a church if you're a Christian, or this place is only for you if you're a Christian and a particular type of Christian, not even a Christian, but then it not only misunderstands the past, it not only misunderstands the richness and diversity of what being Christian has meant in the past, but also what community means in the past. And we hope through this project, we can show that actually a lot of the things you might use a church building for within community isn't a break from being, a break from its Christian past. Mm-hmm. It's a new trajectory or a continuation or a re-expansion of a model that's been around for 800 years. In a way, it's the last 70 years that's been the blip in this long history. Yeah. So that's what we want to do. So the idea that a church could be a community hub where you use temporary architectural installations to make it suitable for people working together around local problems, having meetings, coming up with ideas, and then going out to enact community together. It's very easy to argue that that is entirely consistent with not only Christian beliefs, but also community beliefs. They aren't opposed. Mm-hmm. But it takes the long view to show how that interlocks in a way.
Great. Could we ask a bit more about slow tech? Because I was super interested in that, Xander, when you talked about the idea that, in a sense, what you're really interested in doing is building something that's around slow tech. And I know, Tom, that's something as well that you think about in your own work. And could you tell us a bit more about how you see the potential for slow tech to deal with some of these kind of bigger issues around community or around connection with place, story, narrative, as well as some of the things that Tim's talked about the kind of challenges or the kind of opportunities that real communities face?
I mean, I can speak a little bit about it. Tom's probably a better place to talk in more depth. So when I started my PhD, I developed a smartwatch app thinking that faster participation is better. More people get involved, it's faster, we'll get more comments and therefore we'll do better engagement. But that quickly changed. And I think a lot of it is giving people the space and time to form a comment, and how the design of digital technologies can be used to encourage a particular type of use. So, I mean, in my PhD, I kind of look at the different stages of the planning process and apply that to how that might influence the design of a technology. And whilst you might, at some stages of the planning process, want loads of input from loads of people, at other stages, it needs to be a lot more conversational, and people need to talk a lot more about kind of deep feelings that they have and kind of longer term futures that they might want to communicate. And so yeah, it was trying to how you might kind of take understandings of creativity, reflection from social science and arts, and apply those to the design of digital technology, which I think there's often an assumption when you're designing digital technology, as I said earlier, about efficiency, speed, but there are loads of opportunities that can be designed for, such as kind of slowness, that don't seem to have been taken up as broadly in the kind of design of digital technologies.
Anything to add, Tom, to that?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting relating it to COVID and the time we're in, and how much screen time we're having at the moment, and to think about. I think I started off this lockdown, this pandemic, thinking, "Oh my goodness, where's my practice? Where's it going to go?" Because everyone just went online, and we were all interacting with screens, and that was our predominant experience with everything from theatre to the pub to our friends to work. Everything was channeled through Zoom or similar. But actually, we've all got Zoom fatigue, or there are other problems with engaging with everything in the same way. And I think throughout my practice over like 10 years, my work has always been with, say, objects that have got a bit of electronics in it, that are connected to the internet, that are experimenting with different types of interaction between people, different types of experiences, different ritual, these types of things. And I think what the screen brings is, the problem with the screen is attention as well, and then also the quality of interaction. So we end up, especially when it comes to our tactile sort of engagement with not just the screen, but what's behind the screen. So it could be a brand, it could be a story, it's homogenous. Everything is the same. So there is still a place for calm or slow tech, where we bring a physical object into the world, where individuals can just they know what they're meant to be doing when they're around this object as well. Their focus of attention is on each other, on the object, the story. These you could say these objects are diegetic, and then it's much more powerful, and the engagement is much stronger. So that's what we're exploring on this project, and I'm quite optimistic that there might be more appetite than pre-COVID for this type of work going forward.
Because of the kind of Zoom experience and the screen-based approaches that we've had.
And that is hugely. I mean, I'm very pleased that in many contexts that's been normalised. Mm-hmm. So, especially in a professional context, it means that we don't have to fly across the world to go to one meeting. Yeah. So it's great in many ways, but it doesn't replace every interaction. In fact, we should be seeking out higher quality interaction after. I expect, and we'll be seeking out higher quality interactions after this.
Cool. At this point, I think what would be great is to bring the other team back in, because I know Mark's got a kind of comment for you guys, and there's a question that's come in as well for both teams that I wanted to raise. So maybe Mark, we'll hear from you in a moment with the comment you had, but I maybe could ask a question to both teams that came in, which was really about whether you see differences between generations and how they respond and engage, partly, Xander, with the device that you've created, but also, I guess, with the places themselves. So how far do you feel like there's generational differences in the way that individuals within the two communities you're looking at respond with either the church or the hill? And does that in any sense skew the kind of futures? Like, is there a sense in which there's some voices that are louder than others, which are also critical in framing the futures of those? And I don't, the question ended, does this matter? So maybe if you could both reflect a little bit on the kind of intergenerational nature of the projects from any of you, from either the church or the hill, and about how far you feel like intergenerational work and kind of multiple voices across generations is important in thinking about past, present, futures.
One of the things that we did in Gloucester, just before COVID, actually before Christmas, we started to record the stories of people in care homes who live near the hill. To get their reflections on their experiences of the hill. And I think the danger for us is that all of those things are lost, really. They're not, there's obviously a lot of digital exclusion around those generations. And so that cross-generational story sharing, I think, is a fundamental part of it, as well as the exploration for the young people in the process as well. So I think, part of our thing was to get people to the hill so they could hear those stories in one way or another, so that they weren't lost.
How do you, sorry, Tim or Xander, about kind of digital exclusion and the kind of even slow tech? Is even slow tech digitally exclusive?
Well, I mean, this is why we want to. This is why the device has to be in the church, because then it's open to absolutely everyone. The church is open every day. It's got two buttons, play, record. I mean, it is potentially for everyone. But we know that there are people in the village who will resist it and will we will take the time we need to talk with people about it, to introduce the ideas, to find ways of making it as amenable as possible. There's a very interesting parallel with what Mark has been saying. There is this point of crisis. also with the churches, right? The churches with the Churches Conservation Trust, because the parish can no longer support it. There's no longer a big enough congregation for it. There are 2 churches within the village, and one is now the parish church. And St. Nick's is now not really used. So you want as many people to be on board as possible, because it's their church, and it's building on their stories. But we know that once the older generation pass away in Brockley, it doesn't look like there's necessarily anyone with a love, an interest, and a passion for that building to take that fight forward. So we have to really be very careful in being as open as possible, being as inclusive as possible, of course, but actually now is the time for action. And it has been commented that us coming from the outside, none of us live in Brockley, is potentially the kind of stimulus that could make that happen or could break it. So we have to tread carefully. We don't know how this is going to work out. But this is a high-risk stake. And it's true for Brockley, and it's true for the other 350 churches CCT own, and it's true for the dozens of churches that are added to their portfolio every year.
I sent a question which kind of fits with that really, which is, we have ecclesiastical insurance in Gloucester, the HQ, which is owned by, I think it's the All Churches Trust, that invest in disused churches or churches no longer used for worship. And I just wonder whether they actually knew of this project.
We hope that, I mean, depending on how this works out, we want this to be something that any site could use. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a church. So we're keen to see how this could be adopted further. You know, there is a long game here. It's slow technology, but it's also a slower intervention, because because culture is slow, because communities change very slowly. So we want to both try to scale it in some way and take it as far as we can. Yeah.
Do you send any questions through if there's any other final questions? But I don't know if there's any questions that you'd have for each other, if there's any questions that you, or kind of comments or reflections, because it does feel like these projects share some similarities. There's a kind of nice Venn diagram probably somewhere, isn't there, where at the heart of which is a kind of interest in places and stories and histories and communities that you occupy. But in some ways, what's interesting, I guess, is that you're adopting slightly different methodologies in terms of how those stories are told or retold or teased out. And I don't know if either of you had questions around that, or kind of reflections on the sort of methodological choices you've made. And also, I suppose, the sense that in some ways Mark's very much integrated within the community, whereas Tim, you talked about being outsiders, that you kind of adopted slightly different approaches in some ways about how you relate, kind of how much this is a sort of inside out, outside in sort of project.
It's just a reflection on the word community, really, which I think is such an interesting and difficult word. And in a sense, both projects are about kind of aspiring to understand what community might be. Some people sort of suggested that much of the sort of the history of 20th century social science, particularly sociology, has been about a sort of a kind of nostalgia for community, for something we've lost. But of course, community is also quite exclusionary in various ways, isn't it? You're one of us and one of them and so on. And we've seen, plenty of examples of that in the populist politics of the last couple of years. So it seems to me that both projects in quite sort of small ways are focusing on something, on trying to understand a term which is of enormous importance for all of us. Yeah. And it'd be lovely to see once some of these things have come to fruition, exactly how we can understand something about the kind of the tactics of making communities around particular sorts of spaces or ideas or whatever.
And also what that means. I mean, there's not a single person we've interviewed pre-COVID in our various sites who had the same idea of what community was. And we have been grappling with the idea that the future of a place like St. Nick's, it can't be one thing for one community. It has to be multifunctional. It has to be as complex as community is today. And that question, I mean, it's such a difficult question. You know, it's not our right or up to us to intervene in someone else's community and make it stronger. You know, I no longer know what any of that means. There's so much there to unpick. I think for us there is this sort of core motivation as you know, coming from the outside, that you know, the future of these remarkable buildings that do give us a sense of continuity in a time of fracture will be lost, and many have been lost. So there is a need to do something. But what comes out of it in terms of what community then looks like, it's a black box. So we have to both, you know, be bold and also tread carefully. Whereas I'm sure for Mark, you know, because this is where you live, you know, you have a vision of what you want, of what you want from community, what community means to you, the way it coheres together, perhaps.
Yeah, we have a church on the hill which is dying, as in the very same way. It's a
CCT church, yes.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of common ground there, and I think there's work that will succeed our project and carry on post our project on the hill. And so that slow technology that you're developing might be really interesting for us to find out more about.
Can I add into that? I was thinking with the tiles and the audio, I thought that was amazing, and I really like the way that the kind of tactile, you have to pick the tiles up in order to kind of listen to the story. And we've been talking about with Mark in the Gloucester services, because it's quite, you know, a service station is a very kind of transitory place that people move in and out of, and it's disembedded in very often, except I think the Gloucester services is really breaking with that. It's disembedded from place. So I think having something like those audio tiles with stories from the hill, from local people, in the big kind of vaulted foyer of the services would be amazing. It's the kind of thing that Mark, you were talking about kind of wanting to do. We spoke about sharing the artwork, but to share those audio stories in a similar format, I think would be really interesting.
We should what we should do is leave you to plan together, because it does feel like these are two projects where actually there's, as you start to kind of re-engage in the physical places in the autumn and then I guess in the spring, that they're two projects that I think maybe we could try and bring together, and we can kind of keep you two connected, because it does feel like there's some really kind of common issues around, like Martin, you said, this kind of knotty issue of, say, community assets. In a sense, a hill and a church are both community assets, but as you suggest, that's a much more problematic idea than it first appears, and that's something that you very much have alluded to as well, Tim, in your work. But I should say thanks to all of you for joining us and sharing a little bit about these two projects, and the kind of the halted journey of COVID, but also the sense of two projects that have this extraordinary potential, I think, to them, to kind of think about places, but actually, as you suggested, to think about much bigger issues and broader issues as well. So thank you so much. Thanks to all who've joined us online as well, and thanks for the questions and comments in chat. And this is the end of our work in progress for now, but as you can tell, what we'll do is we'll pick up again once we get through the autumn, and we'll hopefully run a few more of these, and we'll certainly try and bring these two project teams back together again if they're willing to spare another hour sitting in front of their laptops to talk about how projects are developed. Thanks now, and take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.